Emma's a classic book by Jane Austen. It's an older one, it's one of those ones done in the 1800s, one of the classics of English literature. And it's about a young woman, Emma, 21 ish, who lives with her father. And she had a friend slash governess who recently got married, and this disrupted the house. And her father was very kind of set in his ways, and he liked things as it were, which is why Emma, as a woman of 21, had essentially a babysitter. But the governess was being paid to, be a governess, but she'd stopped being a governess long ago and was more just of Emma's friend. Emma's a bit spoiled, but she's not spoiled in a bad way. There are a lot of people who come from rich families, who come from money, who insist on getting their own way and are just absolutely terrible about it if they don't get their own way. But Emma's big concern is shipping. Um, Shipping is planning relationships between people. She's kind of a matchmaker. That's the thing that gives her joy in life, and she did this long involved 4-year plan to get her governess married to Mr. Weston, who seems like a nice man. And uh, so her father, he seems like a nice man and probably is a good match. Her father is, as I said, he's set in his ways and he doesn't like anything changing. And there was a word that I stumbled upon in there, and it was valetudinarian, Valetudinarian. And that means somebody who is very concerned about their health. That is like a hypochondriac, someone who's always afraid of, like, oh no, I am going to get sick. I can't go outside because it is raining. Or, oh no, I can't be cold. I'm slightly cold. I'm going to get a fever. I'm going to die. So that's kind of his thing. And because he didn't like any changes, he doesn't like new people coming in. And he wants to always have someone there. And so when somebody leaves, he's just like, oh, woe is me. But he's well thought of. Now, there's some things in stories from this time period that don't really translate to America, modern America especially. You see it in things like Downton Abbey. You see it in the period pieces, English period pieces, where you have this sort of class stratification. You have the rich, and these are people who have money and they have servants and they don't really worry about work and they don't really do jobs and they don't really do much of anything except get written about. And then you have their servants, and there's like different tiers of servants. So you have like the inside servants, and then you have outside servants are kind of below those, like the gardener. But you have a maid and you have like a butler. But the governess is kind of like in this middle where she is somewhat family and somewhat not family. But at the same time, she's trusted with the kids. So it's not entirely unheard for a governess to marry up into society or into a more middle class position. There were middle class people of the time, probably more than the upper class, but nobody ever writes about. I mean, do you really care about the shopkeeper? No. But, there's. So she, as a governess, married up, and which is good for her. More security, less work. Um, and so that's part of Emma's problem, is because she is the daughter of the richest person in town. Now, her father may not be a noble, because, this is England and there were people who had titles, and, you have the king, you have the earls, you have the dukes, you have barons, baronets, and all of these different little levels of royalty. Um, she may or may not have been one of those levels of royalty, but she was almost essentially there. At times when kings needed money, they sold royalty. So if you had somebody who more or less ran the town, who was the big man about town, who had all the land, who had all the servants, the king would be like, that's nice that you have money and all, but I'm king, and my son is going to be king, and his son is going to be king. And what are you going to do when your son runs out of money? Here, give me money, and I'll make you a baron. And then your son will be a baron, and his son will be a baron. And so that you'll have this. And so there was a lot of trading of money and power. And as I said, don't know if they were involved with that, but he certainly was of the wealth. Because, they described his house. So his house, his mansion, his acreage and yards as being part of Highbury. But not really. It's Hartfield. It's not Highbury. It's Hartfield, which is the mansion and the estate, which just happens to be in the little town of Highbury. So Emma doesn't really have an equal. And so she's making matches between people who she finds interesting and who are close. And she has another guy who she's thinking about making a match with, but she can't find anybody for him. And we'll see how this develops. Because this is what the story of Emma is about.